The Lockheed P-38 Lightning racked up an impressive series of firsts. It was the first Lockheed-designed military aircraft to go into series production. It was the first twinned-engine interceptor to serve with the U.S. Army Air Corps. It was the first production fighter powered by the Allison V-1710 inline engine. It was the first modern fighter equipped with a tricycle landing gear. It was the first American plane to use butt-jointed flush riveted external surfaces. It was the first to make extensive use of stainless steel. It was the first fighter to use a bubble canopy right from the start. It was the first fighter with speeds over 400 miles per hour. It was the first U.S. twin-boom fighter to go into production. It was the first U.S. Army Air Force fighter to shoot down a German aircraft. It was the first U.S. Army Air Force fighter to carry out an escort mission to Berlin. It was the first U.S. Army Air Force plane to land in Japan after the country had surrendered. It was the heaviest U.S. single-seat fighter of World War II. It was the only American fighter in production at the time of Pearl Harbor to still be in production at the war's end, and it accounted for more Japanese aircraft destroyed in combat than any other U.S. fighter. Lockheed was invited along with Boeing, Consolidated, Curtiss, Douglas, and Vultee to take part in a U.S. Army Air Corps design competition, X-608, for a twin-engine high-altitude interceptor. The specification called for a maximum speed of at least 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet and 290 miles per hour at sea level, an endurance at full throttle of 1 hour at 20,000 feet, and the ability to take off and land over a 50-foot obstacle within 2,200 feet. After studying a lot of different designs, Lockheed settled on a twin-boom design with each boom extending aft of the engine and the pilot sitting in an enclosed cockpit in a central nacelle. Each boom was to house one of the new 1,150 horsepower Allison 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine with an exhaust-driven turbo supercharger. The central nacelle contained a forward-firing armament of 1 cannon and 4 50-caliber machine guns. This armament was quite heavy for its time. One advantage of the twin-boom layout was the possibility of installing the armament in the central nacelle, unhampered by the synchronizing gear and allowing sighting of the parallel streams of fire up to the maximum range of 1,000 yards. Tail surfaces consisted of a fin and rudder at the end of each boom and a horizontal tailplane and elevator between the booms. It was anticipated that the twin fin and rudder tail assembly would increase the effective aspect ratio of the tailplane by the end plane effect, thereby providing stability over a large center of gravity range. At 14,800 pounds, the XP-38 weighed more than a bombed-up Bristol Blenheim, at the time the standard British medium bomber. Fowler flaps were fitted between the ailerons and the booms, and between the booms beneath the trailing edge of the wing center section. On September 20th, 1939, the Army placed an order for 66 P-38 fighters. The P-38 armament was changed to 1 37mm cannon and 4 50-caliber machine guns. Armor plate and bulletproof glass was added for pilot protection, and fluorescent instrument lighting was provided for night flying. Reports coming in from the air war in Europe led to the remainder of the initial order for 66 P-38s being completed as P-38D LO. The P-38D differed from the P-38 in having a low-pressure oxygen system, self-sealing fuel tanks, a retractable landing light, and provision for flares. A change in tailplane incidence, together with the redistribution of elevator mass balances, increased the mechanical advantage of the elevator control, resulting in the elimination of buffeting and facilitating dive recovery. The P-38D featured a new low-pressure oxygen system which supplanted the old high-pressure oxygen system of earlier versions. This system became standard on all subsequent production models. Normal fuel capacity remained 210 gallons, but maximum internal fuel was reduced from 410 to 300 gallons. The P-38D had a maximum speed of 390 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. An altitude of 20,000 feet could be reached in 8 minutes. Service ceiling was 39,000 feet. The first P-38Ds began to reach the U.S. Army Air Force units in August 1941. For a brief period, the U.S. Army Air Force considered naming the P-38 Atlanta. However, the P-38D and subsequent versions were officially christened Lightning by the U.S. Army Air Force. By the time of Pearl Harbor, there were only 69 P-38 and P-38D fighters on strength. The first major production version for the U.S. Army Air Force was the P-38E LO series. It differed from the D version in having the 37mm cannon with the 15-round magazine replaced by a 20mm cannon with 150 rounds. The P-38E had improved instrumentation and revised hydraulic and electrical systems. It had a revised nose section with double the ammunition capacity of earlier versions. Early in its life, the P-38 earned a reputation as a pilot killer. A terminal velocity dive in a P-38 was believed by many pilots to be a fatal maneuver. It was possible in a high-speed dive to overstress the plane while trying to pull out, and a number of P-38s lost empennages while doing such maneuvers and crashed, usually with fatal results. It was later determined that these problems were the result of the effects of compressibility. Although it was later found that all aircraft had problems when they operated in these speed ranges, the P-38 was a pioneer in high-speed flight and thus got a bad reputation. The P-38L was the final production version of the Lightning and was numerically the most important of all Lightning versions. The 1st Pursuit Group at Selfridge Field, Michigan, was selected to become the first unit to receive P-38s and P-38Ds in 1941. Although these fighters were not yet combat ready, these outfits had the only truly modern fighters then available to the U.S. Army Air Force, and provided West Coast defense at a time that Japanese attacks on the U.S. mainland were believed to be imminent. Even though the defense of the U.S. West Coast initially took priority, plans were made in the spring of 1942 to deploy Lightning squadrons to Britain. This deployment caused logistical problems, since the U-boat menace made shipping across the Atlantic quite risky. However, development by Lockheed of reliable drop tanks for the P-38F-1LO increased the ferry range from 1,300 to 2,200 miles. This made it possible to ferry the Lightnings to Scotland. On August 14, 1942, a P-38F, flown by 2nd Lieutenant Elza Shaham, shared with a P-40C in the destruction of a Focke-Wulf to obtain the first victory over a Luftwaffe aircraft. The Lightnings were soon in regular combat in the North African theater. The first of these took place on November 19, 1942, when the P-38Fs of the 1st Fighter Group escorted B-17s on a bombing raid on the El Ouenia airfield of Tunis. The 3 P-38 groups contributed a great deal toward the establishment of local air superiority in the area. On April 5, 1943, 26 P-38Fs of the 82nd Fighter Group claimed the destruction of 31 enemy aircraft against the loss of 6 Lightnings. In these air battles, mixed success was obtained. Because of the tactics of the enemy, the Lightnings were forced to fight at lower altitudes of 15,000 feet, and in battles against fighters it was not entirely successful. The twin engines restricted maneuverability to some extent, and the Lightning had a wheel control instead of the conventional stick, which may also have restricted maneuverability. Nevertheless, the Lightning was effective against bombers and had a sensational zoom climb that could rarely be matched. It wreaked great havoc among Rommel's air transport well out to sea, earning for itself the German nickname Der Gabelschwanzteufel, the forked-tailed devil. All Axis forces in the area surrendered on May 13, 1943, due in no small part to the contribution of the Lightning in cutting off Rommel's supply route. The first Lightning-escorted raids on Germany began in 1944 with the raids on aircraft factories in the southern part of that country. In April 1944, the Lightnings escorted bombers in raids on the oil refineries at Ploesti in Romania. Bomb-carrying Lightnings also visited Ploesti on June 10, 1944, when 46 aircraft of the 82nd Fighter Group, each carrying 1,000-pound bombs, paid a visit to the Romano-Americana oil refinery under the protective escort of 48 P-38s of the 1st Fighter Group. On that raid, good bombing and strafing results were obtained, but in fighter actions against the Luftwaffe, 22 P-38s were lost against 23 enemy aircraft claimed destroyed. The three Lightning groups also took part in the August 1944 Allied landings in southern France. After that, they returned to providing fighter escort for bombers operating against strategic targets. By the end of the war, 28 of these Lightning pilots had made ace. The Lightnings played a major role in supporting the D-Day invasion of France in June of 1944. 2 months earlier, they had begun attacking German positions in Normandy in preparation for the landings. Once the troops had landed by air and sea, the P-38s provided close air support. This would be a role that would continue throughout the rest of the war. In air combat over Germany, the Lightning was generally outclassed by the more maneuverable FW-190 and the later marks of the Bf-109, especially at medium and low altitudes. However, the Lightning had a much faster top speed, a higher rate of climb and operational ceiling, and was much better armed. Once pilots had perfected fighting tactics which suited the Lightning's unique characteristics, they had better success. The usual tactics was for the P-38 to climb to a high altitude, then dive down on the enemy, attacking him with a burst of firepower, and then zoom back up out of harm's way. The later versions of the P-38 were equipped with maneuvering flaps, and when the pilots learned how to use these flaps properly, the P-38 could hold its own when maneuvering against German fighters, often being able to turn inside their FW-190 and Bf-109 opponents. The large size of the P-38 was both an advantage and a disadvantage in combat. The P-38 was quite large for a fighter, and Luftwaffe pilots could usually spot the Lockheed fighter at much larger distances than they could Allied single-engine fighters, which were appreciably smaller. In addition, the twin-boomed configuration of the P-38 made it instantly recognizable to the enemy. However, this ease of recognition was not always a disadvantage. P-38s would often feel free to pursue Luftwaffe fighters right through Allied bomber formations with little fear of receiving friendly fire on the gunners. The Allison engines of the Lightnings proved to be somewhat temperamental, with engine failures actually causing more problems than enemy action. It is estimated that every Lightning in England changed its engines at least once. Nevertheless, the ability of the Lightning to return home on one engine was exceptional and saved the life of the pilot of many a wounded Lightning. Experienced pilots could handle the Lightning satisfactorily at high altitude, but too many of the 8th Air Force pilots did not have the training or experience to equip them for flying this temperamentally powered aircraft in combat. Earlier Lightnings had problems with high-speed dives. When the airspeed reached a sufficiently high value, the controls would suddenly lock up, and the Lightning would tuck its nose down, making recovery from the dive difficult. In the worst case, the wings of the Lightning could be ripped off if the speed got too high. This problem caused the Lightning often to be unable to follow its Luftwaffe opponents in a dive, causing many of the enemy to be able to escape unscathed. The problem was eventually traced to the formation of a shock wave over the wing as the Lightning reached transonic speeds, this shock wave causing the elevator to lose much of its effectiveness. The P-38J version of the Lightning cured many of the ills that had been suffered by the earlier versions of the Lockheed fighter, producing a truly world-class fighter which could mix it up with virtually any other fighter in the world. The Lightning was ideally suited for the Pacific theater. It possessed a performance markedly superior to that of its Japanese opponents. It possessed a range significantly better than that of the P-39s, P-40s, and P-47s available in 1942 in the Southwest Pacific, and its twin engines offered an additional safety factor when operating over long stretches of water and jungle. The Lightnings proved to be extremely rugged and could take a lot of battle damage and still keep flying. Missions lasting 9, 10, or even 12 hours became routine, and many wounded Lightnings were able to limp home on only one engine. The maneuverability of the Lightning was inferior to that of its nimble Japanese opponents, but by the use of appropriate tactics, for example, the avoidance of dogfighting at low altitudes and the use of fast diving attacks, enabled the P-38 squadrons in New Guinea and the Solomons to achieve impressive results. When compared with the Zero, the Lightning came off badly in terms of speed and maneuverability at medium and low altitudes, but had a far higher top speed, rate of climb, and operational ceiling, and was much better armed. When the P-38 tried to outturn a Zero at low altitudes, it usually ended up second best. However, when the unique attributes of the Lightning were used to best effect, the results were devastating. The best tactic was for the Lightnings to loiter at high altitudes and then dive down on the Zero formations in a blaze of concentrated firepower, using the Lightning's impressive climbing rate to zoom back out of harm's way. If this did not work, the wise Lightning pilot would then use his superior speed to make good his escape. April 1943. In one of the most important missions of the war in the Pacific, P-38 pilots ambushed the plane of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet of the Japanese Navy. They reached their target on schedule just as Yamamoto's flight was coming in. In the ensuing battle, 2 bomber transports and at least 5 Japanese fighters were destroyed at the cost of 1 P-38. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr. was credited with downing the aircraft in which Admiral Yamamoto had been flying. By the end of the Pacific War, P-38s were flying from bases on Ie Shima and in the Philippines on sorties ranging from as far as Formosa, Korea, and the Ryukyus. They are credited with the destruction of more Japanese aircraft than any other type of U.S. fighter. On August 25, 1945, a pair of P-38s piloted by Colonel Clay Tice and his wingmen were the first American aircraft to land in Japan after the surrender on August 15th. They later claimed that this unauthorized landing was due to engine difficulties, a somewhat suspect explanation. Nevertheless, this was a fitting recognition for an aircraft which had contributed so much to victory.